believe I'm doing this. Using Dad's Goblin gear is just nuts. That weird invoice I found with Dad's stuff sure made it look like he was hiring the Skulls gang to do dirty work for him. I have to know what he was doing.
Welcome to the New Game Plus feature where we can play as the Green Goblin. Or rather, Harry as the Green Goblin. First thing of note, Harry still has all of Spidey's combos. He doesn't get his own special ones. He's also incapable of using Spidey's cannonball kick or controlling himself in the air after he jumps off his glider. So he's less maneuverable is what I'm saying. But his glider does give him the power of completely controlled free flight. So that's probably a bit of a bonus. He also has a lot more gadgets than Spidey does. Like this missile. Just kind of hurl that at people, and it blows them up. Doesn't deal a lot of damage, but it knocks them over. All of the Goblin's gadgets use our web meter, and we have to grab webbing cartridges just like Spidey in order to fill it back up. Of course, it's not actually our web meter this time. We're just going to call it our power meter. All of the special gadgets Goblin can use on foot are not very powerful, all things considered. He doesn't have an equivalent of Spidey's impact webbing. Also, of course, the glider has its own weapons like machine guns. The machine guns barely deal any damage, but they are projectile attack, and they fire very rapidly. If we fire for too long, though, the glider will overheat, and we have to wait for it to cool down before we can attack with it again. The glider has two other attacks besides its machine gun. There are homing blades, which we're going to test out on some goons up here. They deal more damage than the machine gun, but they seem for some reason to deal more damage to bosses than regular goons. And the glider's last attack was that bomb, which we don't want to be so close to the ground when we use it. We don't get a cutscene for defeating all the goons on this level. There is some slightly changed dialogue, but there's no special cutscenes, and the story is very slapdash to say the least. We're only going to be looking at the levels that are interestingly different if you play them as Goblin, not every level in the game. A lot of the levels are lacking context completely, but this is basically just what-if mode with some added dialogue and, well, completely new game mechanics. So I think it's a suitable replacement. It certainly does change the way you have to approach the situations you find yourself in, so I'd say that's a success. Welcome to the second warehouse level, which is the one where we take down Uncle Ben's killer again, this time as the Green Goblin. Stealth in these levels as the Green Goblin is a bit more difficult. For reasons I think are apparent by how I'm trying to navigate this vent. The main reason we're playing this level is because the big fight in this upcoming room is a bit different when you have the Goblin to play with, because you can't use Spidey's web dome. First thing of note is that the glider is way better at crowd control than the crowd control combos when you're playing as Goblin. Just dropping a ton of bombs on everyone while you fly over their head is a really good way to scatter people. And you can sweep over a wide area using the machine gun, just doesn't deal very much damage. It's also way easier to avoid enemy fire using the glider than when you're swinging around as Spidey. For some reason the enemies just have a way harder time aiming at you. We could also use the homing blades, of course, but those are better used on single enemies. We could, of course, get off the glider and try to fight them hand to hand, but I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's a good idea at all. We're going to do it very briefly, so that way I can show you one of Goblin's more hilarious abilities, but then we're going to get right back on the glider. I mean, the point is to win, right? Nobody said anything about playing fair. Plus, I think you've seen enough melee combat when we played the game proper. In case you're asking why I don't use the Goblin's abilities on foot, that's because they're pretty useless, except for this one. That's the hilarious one I was talking about. The ground catches on fire behind him and he knocks everything over. Doesn't hurt anybody worth shit, but it's pretty hilarious. I mean, I guess it's a cute replacement for a crowd control combo, but it also requires our power meter, so it's infinitely less useful. That's kind of a shame, but what can you do? Now it is time to fight Uncle Ben's killer again. And it's more difficult as the Green Goblin, because the Green Goblin cannot use Spidey's cannonball kick. The main strategy is going to be the same, but I might be a bit lazier. First, though, I really want to illustrate how anime this guy is, because you don't get to see it properly as Spidey. We're going to use the Goblin's missiles to illustrate. This fucker can dodge all over the place. He is a master of the dodge roll. Comes straight out of a character action game. So using the missiles to knock him over consistently doesn't work too good. But when he gets back up, you can still do that same combo on him. Right here you'll see, he dodges 3 of my missiles in a row. Guy knows what's up. So because there's no incredibly easy way for us to knock him over, unless we want to bomb the crates and accidentally hurt ourselves in the process, we're just going to have to sneak up on him. Which sometimes doesn't work. You might be curious why we can't just use the glider's homing blades on him.
Where is he?
And that's mostly because he just shoots us right off the glider. Our machine gun can very briefly stun him, but he starts firing right after we stop shooting it. So yeah, he's actually more difficult to fight as the Goblin, which you might not figure. Fortunately, every other boss is still a joke. Some of them are even bigger jokes than when you play as Spidey, but this guy is an exception. Removing that cannonball kick really messed me up. I guess they knew what they were doing.
That thug didn't know anything, but he had met Goblin previously. Was it Dad? If only I knew where to look next. Oscorp Light Mech. Why is it here?
Harry in this game is voiced by Josh Keaton, who would go on to voice Spider-Man in Spectacular Spider-Man.
Really persistent.
There's really no comparison between his voice work here and there, though. His voice work in Spectacular Spider-Man is so much better. But in both instances, he's better at it than Toby. He also voices Spidey for Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time. And he does an excellent job there as well. The only reason we're showing this level is so you can see how air combat works as Goblin. Which is to say, you just hover directly in front of something and hold the shoot button. Because of this, virtually every instance of air combat with him is a joke. And I think you've seen enough here, really.
Here's where I get to prove I'm one of the good guys.
It's also where we get to use the Razor Bats. We only get to summon 4 of them, or sometimes 5 if the game glitches out. They don't really hurt the enemies very much. It takes forever for them to actually kill anybody. But they do distract the enemies, which is their main purpose. As soon as one of the Razor Bats dies, we can summon another one immediately, by just holding our hand up and making it pop out of thin air. The Razor Bats are very useful for taking on 3 or 4 enemies at a time, but they're pretty much useless if the fight is as big as that one in the Uncle Ben's Killer level. Then you're just wasting your time using them. As you saw at the very beginning of the level, you can also use them while you're on the glider, but that does virtually nothing as well. Because they're not for damage dealing, they're just a distraction. So yeah, like I said, a lot of the levels have no context now like this one. It's the same situation as when Spidey was here for some reason. Shocker's back and all his goons are beating up the police again, and you shouldn't think too hard about it, because they didn't. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but clearly they had to choose between having no story where you play as the Goblin and having a really weird story that only kind of makes sense half the time. And they went with the second one, and that's okay. It's just very odd. But hey, any excuse to drive by carpet bomb people is a good excuse, right? This level would be slightly more oh, we teleported. That happens. That happens sometimes when the game needs you to be somewhere. But there's no cutscene because you're playing as Goblin now. Or rather, Harry as the Goblin. They could show that cutscene because there was no other characters in it. That pillar was the only character. I find it a little weird that Harry is as strong as Spidey in terms of melee combat. But like I said, probably good idea not to think too much about it. Alright, the last stretch of the level you're already familiar with, and I have nothing new to add to it. So let's just get to the next level, or rather the level after the next level.
When I'm through with you, the only things left will be dust and fillings!
The glider moves so fast that Shocker barely had time to fire once. And of course with the glider, getting that combo in the sewer is no big deal. For some reason all the combos respawn when you're playing as Goblin. Even though you already have them all at this point, probably. This thing turns on a dime, by the way.
Come on, freak. You need to learn a lesson, and Shocker's School of Hard Knocks is now open.
Oh, give me a break, Shock. I can't believe you have any class, let alone a whole school worth.
So the Shocker fight is still a joke for the same reason, the reason being projectiles. Especially our homing blades. Our homing blades absolutely tear the Shocker up. It's also way easier to avoid the Shocker's attacks using the glider. He can knock us off the glider with a single blast, as you just saw. But when it's so easy to defeat him, you really don't even need to pay attention. Again, no mention of what Shocker's doing back here, or, you know what, I said we should stop thinking so much about it.
Wait till you see what I can do. Hey, Vulture! Didn't your mother ever teach you that stealing is wrong?
You're too persistent, buffoon! These gems are insured. The only injured party here is you, in a moment!
The chase with Vulture is really a joke as Goblin, because not only does the glider move fast enough to keep up with him normally, but it has a boost function, so we can stay literally right on top of him.
This will slow the pest. What's it going to be, do-gooder? A few jewels or innocent lives?
No. Maybe I can use the repair function in my razor bats to stop that sign from collapsing.
Yeah, you know, the Razorbats with their handy repair function. So I'm pretty sure you could get hit by every single one of the Vulture's attacks here and still be able to catch up with him, no problem.
Those people down there look thirsty, don't they? Why don't I serve them a drink?
Not if I can help it.
Unfortunately, we can't just gun the Vulture down while we're chasing him, even though that should be a possibility. Trying to do so like I did just there gets us hit. And again. I guess if there's one area you should feel the most empowered with the Goblin, it would be every area. But I guess flight's a good substitute. You can definitely move faster than the Goblin from the main game can. Again, thanks to the boost function.
Box. You're not getting away from me that easily. You shouldn't be flying around at your age, Vulture. You'll hurt yourself.
While you're playing as the Goblin, the Vulture is now the easiest boss in the entire game. His health drains insanely fast.
You shouldn't be flying around at your age, Vulture. You'll hurt yourself.
After this fight is the Goblin stuff, which is not so fun for me. It has the most unique dialogue out of the entire New Game Plus mode, but it's just not fun to fight the Goblin as the Goblin. Not even a little bit, really. I know you're probably asking, what about Scorpion? The tackle combo is what about Scorpion. The glider is useless against him, so we just end up using the tackle combo over and over again.
You damaged my beautiful wings!
You have a lot of pep for someone your age. Help! This all seems eerily familiar. I don't know who you think you are, but you're mistaken if you think you can threaten my friends.
It's about time we met Osborn. Go ahead and save the girl, if you can.
As Goblin, it's possible to clip through the balloon. Can't do this as Spidey.
Harry?
Hang on.
Why are you dressed like...
So
Don't worry,
many
I'll
people,
explain
so
later.
little time, eh, Spider-Man?
You may have heard that this goblin imposter still calls us Spider-Man.
Right. Now how about telling me why you're doing this? I'm sure not letting you ruin his company and take over as the Goblin.
When Spider-Man escaped, your father tried to get rid of me.
So you're a liar and a screw-up.
Familiar toys, right, kid?
Oh yeah, great.
You're just a pale shadow of your father.
Want to test that?
Fool! Why do you want to keep fighting me?
Well, I can't leave my dad's legacy to losers like you, right?
It's not exactly clear who this guy we're fighting is, but I think he's the ghost of Goblin. Not Norman, but the Goblin part of Norman. That being said, there's just not enough dialogue between him and Harry to establish anything. Also, now the fight is really boring.
Just nonsense. I think I'll find a new playground.
No, you're not misseeing things. We are at the final fight with Goblin. And that's because I skipped all the stealth stuff at Oscorp. There's no context for those levels either. I mean, you can tell yourself that he was there to find out about this Goblin imposter if you want to, if that helps. But there are no cutscenes and there's very minimal new dialogue. Even the boss fight against his super mech starts without a word from Harry. A plus side to playing as Goblin, or maybe not a plus side, is that he's just as easy this time as he was last time. With Spidey, he's a little bit harder to fight on the glider the second time. But with Harry, not so much. So yeah, this was the new Game Plus. It's basically a replacement for What If mode, and I think it's a damn good replacement, considering it has entirely new game mechanics. I do think making the Goblins on-foot gadgets so weak was a bit of a mistake, because there's really no reason for you to use them. You just end up wanting to use the glider the whole time. I call them his on-foot gadgets, but you can also use them in the air. But why would you when the glider has built-in attack functions that are much better? Even though this is the end of the main game again, there are a lot of extras in the form of mini-games available in the training mode. And a couple other Easter eggs, so I would stick around for that. You don't need to watch the credits again. Get out of here. I'll see you next video.